Hello and welcome. I'm Bob Cusack, Editor-in-Chief of The Hill. Thank you for joining us for Rare Diseases, a conversation on value assessments, where we'll be exploring how to increase availability and access to orphan drugs. We'll be using that term a lot today, so for those who don't know, this is the term for therapies used to treat rare diseases. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, for its support of today's event. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank my colleague Julia Manchester for joining me today to facilitate these important discussions. Apart from the two of us, The Hill's editor-at-large, Steve Clemens, will also be making a cameo or two along the way. 1 in 10 Americans suffers from a rare disease. That's 30 million Americans who need access to treatment. Since the passage of the Orphan Drug Act in 1983, progress has been made in researching and developing drugs for the 7,000 rare diseases currently identified by scientists. Still, many diseases lack adequate therapies, preventing patients from accessing new innovations. What are some of the unique roadblocks drug manufacturers face when developing orphan drugs? How can we encourage new breakthrough treatments at prices patients can afford? And what can policymakers do to increase innovation and access to orphan drugs for all patients? We are going to be putting these questions and more in front of our fantastic speakers, but first, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at the Hill Events using the hashtag The Hill Rare Diseases. We are broadcasting live and will be taking your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video. Refreshing the page should, in most cases, fix the problem. My first guest is Congresswoman Anna Eshoo from California. She's the chair of the Health Subcommittee and has recently introduced legislation to create the Advanced Research Projects Agency to develop disease treatments that would otherwise struggle in commercial markets. Welcome, Congresswoman. We really appreciate you joining us today.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, first of all, a little news of the day. Build Back Better. The House is waiting for the Senate to act. The big question of the week, month is, do you think Congress and Democrats, because there are no Republicans supporting this bill, can get this bill done through the House and the Senate by Christmas?
Oh, I think it can be done by Christmas. It should be done by Christmas. Nothing is going to change beyond Christmas. So I think that it would be a gift to the country if the Senate acts and it's passed and sent to the president for his signature. There are so many important policies in it that the country is going to benefit from. So pedal to the metal.
You are, as I mentioned, you're the chair of the Health Subcommittee. Can you just tell us, before we get into the rare disease issue, just what's on the agenda for your Health Subcommittee? It's a very important subcommittee.
It is a very important subcommittee. Of all the subcommittees of energy and commerce, we have the most bills awaiting our action. So many bills that are referred to the subcommittee. So we have been the most productive subcommittee of energy and commerce, but I always want more. I want to take up more, pass more, so that not only my constituents, but the American people benefit from what we do.
As far as rare diseases, I used to cover health care, and a lot of the focus is on Medicare and Medicaid and those type of things. What drew you to rare diseases? Because it doesn't get as much attention as it deserves.
Well, these are people that are awaiting not only the actions of the Congress, but live daily hoping and praying for breakthroughs because they have a rare disease. And so there are many challenges around this, both for the drug makers and then, of course, for patients. It's a challenge for drug makers because it's a smaller universe of patients that will be partaking in the drugs that they bring forward. So it's not only a smaller patient population for these rare diseases, it makes it difficult, as I said, for drug makers to identify and recruit participants in the trials. Now, in the 1983 Drug Act, as you stated, that there were incentives that were built into that law, that they would have marketing, 7 years of marketing exclusivity. There was a 50% tax credit that was attached to it. The tax code is motivating across so many sectors, but this one in particular. Now, in the 2017 Republican tax cut package, they reduced the tax credit to 25%. I think that it should move back up because the less motivation there is on the part of the drug makers to come forward and make the investments in these trials, and trials are really costly. I think that tax credit should move back up to 50%. And in the trials, because it's a smaller universe of participants, they often have financial challenges, mobility impairments, and so those are all areas that make it more difficult, that makes it different for the rare disease population versus others.
You mentioned that legislation in 1983. You have legislation on the Advanced Project Agency for Health. Can you tell us a little bit about this and where you see could this happen in the new year?
Well, it's a top priority of mine, Bob, and it's ARPA-H. We know from the defense side that DARPA was created many breakthroughs. Why? Because it takes on high-risk projects. And that has been extraordinarily successful. Many years ago, when I led the effort in the House for an innovation agenda, we created ARPA-E around energy issues. That too has been highly successful. So now ARPA-H. And this is different from other undertakings because it will pursue high-risk projects around not only rare diseases, but around those diseases where we have not made the kind of progress we need to make when someone receives a diagnosis that is a death sentence. Glioblastoma, pancreatic cancer, ALS. These are horrible diseases. And as I said, when someone receives this diagnosis, it is a death sentence. So this is a vision of the president. And I think that an ARPA model is the model that we need to pursue. So I'm very excited about it.
Is there a Senate companion? So if, getting it through the House, obviously you're a leader in the House. Do you think it could pass the Senate as well?
Well, I think so. I've spoken to Senator Murray, who is the chair of the Senate Help Committee, and I believe that we can get this over the finish line. A lot of people are waiting for this in our country, and I'm very pleased that academicians, scientists are supporting this legislation because of the approach. So, as I said, it's a top priority of mine, and I look forward to getting this over the finish line. Get it to the president for his signature.
I wanted to ask you about COVID-19, kind of a two-part question, because we used to do these events a couple of years ago. We'd be sitting side by side. Do you have optimism going forward on COVID-19 that we're going to get back to a semi-normal situation in the new year? It's been a very frustrating 2 years. And I guess the second part of that question is, are there any lessons from COVID-19 that we can apply to rare diseases?
Well, I think in terms of lessons learned, what COVID has laid bare are many of the shortcomings in our system, our supply chain. It seems kind of deeply buried in the past now, but I remember being on the phone with hospitals that were desperate to get supplies, some of the most the supplies just for the workforce. And so we have a lot of work to do to really repair our supply chain. We should not be dependent on foreign countries for this. I am more than hopeful, though. And the reason I say that is we have the tools in the United States. We have the breakthrough in terms of the drugs. We have the vaccinations. We have the platforms that have been established in communities across the country. And so, where other countries are literally begging for the vaccinations, we have them. I think our greatest challenge is to move the population of our country to be vaccinated, to receive the 2 shots, to get the booster, because we know that without them, if we have 25 to 30% of the American people that are not vaccinated, we are holding ourselves back. I think that's our biggest challenge. The policies we can certainly put into place, and we've been moving to put those in place. But people need to be vaccinated.
Last question, the disparity in dealing with rare diseases. Is there one in certain parts of the country, because healthcare generally, as you well know, it's advantageous to be in certain parts of the country because the healthcare is better. Is that the case with rare diseases?
I think the case with rare diseases is more with the drug manufacturers. What will motivate them, certainly through the tax code, to actually enter this space. Everyone needs to realize that when they produce a drug, and we've been very successful with the 1983 Act. Prior to that, the FDA only had approved some 38 drugs. There are over 770 that have been approved since this law was put into place. But I think that there needs to be some policy and tax changes around the tax credits, certainly. And I think the costs of the trials and the limited number of people that are placed in them. I think if we beef that up and make it attractive to drug manufacturers, that once the drug is approved, obviously it's a smaller population of people. It's not the entire population of the country, that more of these drugs will reach the population that so desperately needs them.
Are those the biggest roadblocks for both manufacturers and patients, the incentives that you mentioned, tax credits, or is there something else that's even bigger?
Well, I think that in my view, that is. Now, the drug manufacturers certainly need to come forward to Congress and identify other roadblocks that I may not be aware of. But I think that restoring that 50% tax credit is very important, because they have to make a large investment. Every drug manufacturer has to make a large investment in clinical trials. They're expensive. So certainly the exclusivity, the 7 years of exclusivity, but also restoring the 50%, I think would be most helpful. And I do think that we get ARPA-H over the finish line, that would be a boon to the rare disease sector in our country.
As far as, we talked a little bit about where you live, but as far as disparities and minorities, is that also something that needs to be addressed as far as rare diseases, that if you're not white, then you have a more difficult time actually getting the treatment you need?
Well, it's a very important point that you make, Bob, and that, I think, needs to be addressed in the clinical trials. You need to have minorities. I'm drawing up legislation on that right now, and there are other bills that are in the hopper relative to the clinical trials. Minorities need to be a part of that because they will be part of the rare disease community that will benefit from the drugs once they hit the market. And it's not a fair market, I would say, if minorities are not included in clinical trials.
It's such an interesting discussion, but I do want to ask about, you mentioned supply chain earlier. Would your legislation address that? You know, what's the fix there?
Well, there are many fixes that need to be addressed. Certainly, in terms of the medical supplies, we saw healthcare workers in hospitals wrapping themselves in garbage bags. In the United States of America, we have that? I don't think so. So there is legislation that addresses that. I think that a lot of manufacturing really needs to be done in the United States. There is a race to the bottom in terms of costs, and then we paid a huge price for it with this pandemic.
Well, Congresswoman, thanks for joining us. It's such an important issue. We all know people who have rare diseases, and thanks for your work, and thanks for this discussion. I really enjoyed it today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you.